Well, welcome everybody and happy Global Entrepreneurship Week. I'm JD LaRock, President and CEO of NIFTY, the Network for Teaching Entrepreneurship. We are honored to be able to gather with all of you again this year. Let me start out by extending profound thanks to the Citi Foundation and EY, along with ServiceNow, the supporters who make this event possible. This annual panel conversation was born out of NIFTY's World Series of Innovation, in which leading global companies propose challenges aligned to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And young people around the world use their entrepreneurial mindsets to come up with and propose innovative solutions to those challenges. NIFTY's desire to deepen our connection to the UN Sustainable Development Goals led us to decide to celebrate Global Entrepreneurship Week by convening NIFTY youth, industry, nonprofits, and philanthropy to advance dialogues around social entrepreneurship solutions. And that's what this event is today. The UN Global Goals conversation is a favorite of mine, as a matter of fact, because the conversation is very impactful and very organic. There are so many great ideas that will be brought up in this hour, so I know it will serve as a jumping off point for all of us to continue putting our actions alongside this dialogue to make the impact we are all aiming for. Before we get to the heart of the conversation, let's learn a little bit about this year's World Series of Innovation and the challenges our students are being given to choose from.
Sustainable cities, zero hunger, climate action, gender equality. These are some of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Objectives focused on finding solutions to crises, to build a more inclusive and sustainable world during this critical moment in history. The Network for Teaching Entrepreneurship, or NIFTY, through its World Series of Innovation, asks young people aged 13 to 24 to work toward advancing the 17 Sustainable Development Goals by selecting a sponsored challenge to solve. These are the World Series of Innovation Challenges presented by the 2022 Challenge sponsors. Through their creativity, accountability, and desire for change, these students utilize the power of the entrepreneurial mindset to create a lasting impact on the world around them. Let's hear from some of last year's student participants about their WSI experience.
I participated in the Saint-Gobain Sustainable Cities Challenge.
I was part of the Citi Foundation Inclusive Growth Challenge.
I focused on the PIMCO Food Equity Challenge.
I participated in the Saint-Gobain Challenge for Sustainable Cities.
My friends and I participated in the PIMCO Food Equity Challenge.
The challenge that I took on was the EY Collaborate for Impact Challenge.
There's a lot of food being discarded in Singapore because it looks ugly, not presentable and not aesthetic, but they are perfectly edible and they are a great source of nutrition. So my idea was to really collect these so-called ugly foods from fruit and vegetable vendors and repurpose it into nutritious meals to be served to migrant workers.
We decided maybe having large towers where we can have all sorts of hydroponic technologies, solar like harvesting in terms of getting all the energy back into the system, and making it mostly autonomous, and also, more efficient per square mile, so we can start eliminating some of those food deserts.
My school was actually doing some construction, and I saw that there was a lot of waste being thrown away, and just a lot of waste being produced, throughout the construction site.
CardBio was basically a solution to take biodegradable materials like cardboard and bamboo and to recycle them into a building material that not only replaced current materials in the market, but also reduced our carbon footprint.
I've started this organization called Xiao Trims, where we actually provide haircuts for the unemployed while giving them hygiene services. And one way that we do that is we actually work with cosmetology schools and also work centers.
And what our app does is it brings together eco-friendly people, consumers, restaurants, organizations. So we bring these people together on a single platform and we help everyone work together and collaborate towards a single goal, which is to lessen everyone's carbon footprint and make a better impact on our environment.
If you care about something, you should really just go after it.
We have the ability to create technology and create new things for the benefit of our entire community.
This journey motivated me and inspired my goal to become a social entrepreneur.
Working on the challenge really gave me hope that problems that we currently have can be solved, and it really opened my mind to what could be possible if we all work together.
Well, I love seeing so many of our favorite friends in the live chat here. And I also love that Arnav's closing statement talked about what can be solved if we all work together. And that is exactly what we're hoping would come of opening young people's minds to these challenges in a tangible way. Now that we see what's captured the imagination of our learners, I'm very pleased to kick off our panel discussion moderated by Bill Spindle, climate editor for Semafor. Recently, Bill was at the Council on Foreign Relations as an international affairs fellow, and he traveled around India reporting on climate change and the transformation of the global energy system. Before that, he was at the Wall Street Journal for many years in many capacities, including senior writer for global energy and bureau chief for both the Middle East and South Asia. I'll let Bill tell you a little bit more about himself, and he'll have each of our esteemed panelists introduce themselves as well. Bill, it's a pleasure to turn the conversation over to you.
Thanks, JD. Those are such impressive projects. To see all that, it's really, really remarkable. Thanks for having me to do this. It's really something that's a thrill for me to be able to do. I've been a journalist really all my life, all my working life, certainly almost 40 years now, and I've covered all sorts of things in all sorts of places. I covered the auto industry in Japan. I covered the finance industry in New York. I've covered energy around the world, agriculture. I've worked in the Middle East, and then, as you mentioned, in the last 6 months, I've been in India. Prior to about the first half of this year, traveling around by train, looking at climate impacts and energy transition issues within India. And what you really see, and this brings us back to our panel to some extent, to the organization, is really the need for entrepreneurship and innovation within the structure. You really see it happening all over the world. I really saw it in India, where you saw all sorts of innovative approaches, both to adapting to climate change, which is very much affecting a lot of parts of India, from cities to the little rural villages in the mountains and the Himalayas, but also innovation and entrepreneurship on the problem solving side. How are we going to solve these problems of energy transition, of changing and building sustainability into our food systems, that sort of thing? I really, really saw that. So that kind of brings us to the panel today, which, the title we've chosen for this is Climate Change, a Human Issue. And as I say, you really see that, particularly in the developing world. I was in India, but you go to Africa, you go to Latin America, into Southeast Asia, you can really see how climate change is impacting real people on the ground today and how they're having to deal with that. And again, come up with both solutions for adapting to it, but helping contribute to the solutions as well. So that's kind of where we start today. We've got a great panel, a lot of really fascinating, interesting people. I'm going to let them introduce themselves here for a little bit, so you can learn a little bit more about them. And I'd encourage them to talk about how not just what you do. We want to hear about what you do and how you do it, but also tell us a little bit about how you came into that position and how you came to sustainability as a career choice. Did one thing as a youth or something inspire you to get into it? Is it something you always wanted to do, or did you just kind of find your way into it, which is in a sense how I did? So why don't we start with Omar? Perhaps you can tell us a little bit about that, Omar. I know you may have to leave us at some point during the conversation, but we'd love to hear a little bit more about how you came to be who you are and what you're doing.
Well, thank you very much indeed. Actually, my name is Omar Hernandez. I'm originally from Venezuela, and I am a program manager and public information officer here at the United Nations Academic Impact. And the core of our work engaging with the universities and colleges around the world. Precisely, it's about sustainability. Before that, I worked with the UN Climate Change Secretariat in Bonn and the UN Office of Drugs and Crime. I worked with the media, covering human rights bodies in Geneva, and I was a professor at the university back home, teaching human rights, international law, and international journalism. So pretty much my whole adult life has been devoted to the United Nations in one way or another, but particularly on sustainability issues. Actually, my master's degree was in cooperation for development, and I did that before the SDGs came into place. Back then were the MDGs, and of course, although the word sustainability doesn't appear anywhere in the UN Charter, I've always been fascinated by the whole broad spectrum and the wide range of activities that the UN does concerning international cooperation in the economic and social areas, and of course include environment, climate change, and sustainability. And I believe I will be very passionate about sustainability, not only because of the importance that it has to have a healthier, more inclusive planet, but also because sustainability nowadays, if we take a look at the SDGs, it's not just about the ecology and the environment, which is important in itself, but it covers a wide range of issues that are all interrelated and interconnected: conflict, poverty, human rights, equality. And when you see the map of the world where most of the environmental damage has been done, and but the countries that are suffering the most because of the consequences of climate change, usually the countries that are poorer, that have political instability and have a very difficult situation. So I came into this because of my undergraduate studies and graduate studies, but also as a personal connection with these topics. I'm always privileged to be here at the UN, helping universities to go into more sustainable institutions of higher education.
Thanks very much. We can move on to Candace Hewitt, who's at the City Impact Fund. She's in the private sector. So tell us a little bit about what you do and how you came to do it.
Hi, good afternoon. And it's a pleasure to be on with these esteemed panelists. I'm Candace Hewitt. I'm a VP, a member of the City Impact Fund team. And we are a corporate VC and venture investing group focused on startups that have a double bottom line benefit. But a little bit about myself and how I came to work in the realm of sustainability. I started my career actually in advertising many moons ago, and had always been keen to some of the themes around consumer demand for more responsible, more eco-friendly products, more citizen and stakeholder engaged corporate entities, and a lot of that demand really bubbling up through the airwaves among consumers that started to really take shape and to begin to help drive adaptation in corporate strategy, certainly starting in many ways with brands and cause-related marketing and so forth. But really, I think as we've seen that evolution take shape over the last 10 to 20 years, it's become a core consideration for corporate strategy at really the highest levels. And along the way, I wanted to be a part of that push towards driving sustainability into the heart of corporate strategy. I studied sustainable development in public policy during my graduate studies. And coming out of that, did a wide range of work across industries at TIAA and Nuveen, an asset management firm, focused on environmental, social, and governance issues, or what we now call ESG considerations in asset management from the investor lens, and understanding really what were the concerns and risks as well as opportunities that companies are facing, that investors should care about, that managers should care about, because they impact not only the bottom line of the company, but stakeholders more broadly. And so I've been continuing that work now, working with small companies, so not just public entities, but real startups that are working on innovative solutions to some of these similar environmental and social issues now through the funding work of the City Impact Fund.
Okay, thanks very much. So Dr. Matthew Bell is up next. I think I'm coming to you all from Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt, where the 27th annual Conference of the Parties, that's a big climate summit that happens every year. I know Matthew I think was here much of last week and just returned back home to London. Yeah, tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got into your position, and maybe give us 1 or 2 seconds on COP.
Thanks, Bill, and thanks for inviting me. I'm looking forward to the conversation. Yes, embarrassingly for my own personal carbon footprint, 3.5 hours ago, I was in Italy for the last couple of days. Just before that, in Sharm el Sheikh, where you are, Bill, joining the COP27 conversations around climate change. I am now just outside Oxford in the UK, where I live, and it's, as you can see probably through the window behind me, it's just before 10 at night. So we are out of daylight, fortunately. So a bit about me. I run the climate change and sustainability services team in EY. So we've got the largest number of sustainability professionals working in a professional services organization globally. Over 3,000 people in our practice who help clients with sustainability, environment, health and safety, climate change, and a broad set of social and other activities around the sustainability agenda as it's come to be known. I, like you, Bill, have got a few grey hairs, so I've been in sustainability for the last couple of decades. And like most people who've been in this space for a while, there were no sustainability courses and master's degrees in that kind of field. So my background was actually science. So I grew up as what we call a wet lab bench scientist, working in genetic engineering, actually. And the scientific discipline that I worked on 20 plus years ago was to try and work out how we can grow crops in really arid environments, particularly in parts of the world where we know that we're going to have much less access to water. That interest in science led me into a policy role in government in the UK, where I started to lead the program office for climate and energy, supporting the development of domestic and international policies around action on climate change. I then moved into consulting. I moved myself from the UK to Australia back in 2007 to start the climate change and sustainability practice, and we've built it up from there. Principally because I wanted to work with governments still, but I also wanted to work with the private sector in growing out the impact that we can have around what I see as probably the largest economic transformation of our lifetimes, climate risk. And so this COP trip, Bill, for me, was the first since I went whilst I was in government, actually before, as you'll remember, Bill, Copenhagen in 2009. And they have changed quite dramatically. So what was once delegates and lawyers negotiating for the countries who came together for first the meeting of parties, which was the developing nations and the conference of parties, now is a combined conference. And if I was being harsh, a giant trade show for industry and governments to come together around how we all act on driving action on climate change. It's been an interesting couple of weeks. I'm sure you are seeing the same, Bill. We are hoping for some activity over the dying few days that we have remaining in COP, particularly I think around things like loss and damage, around the agricultural sector, and some new areas of focus, particularly around support financially for developing nations to adapt to the ravages of climate change that will be even inevitable under the current trajectory that we're heading towards. So hopeful for activity from the last few days, but like many of the COPs that have preceded them, unfortunately, not as much progress as I think lots of us on this call would like to see. But good to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much. Next up is Emer Clark from ServiceNow. Emer, tell us a little bit about yourself and ServiceNow.
Yeah, hi Bill. I'm Emer Clark. I'm director at ServiceNow. And yeah, thank you for having me today. It's great. That's a good question to start with, I think, especially with the audience, to figure out where we all came from. My background is I trained as a civil engineer, and in my final year of civil engineering, there was a option to do a project on kind of figuring out if we could put offshore turbines out and get some energy off the Aran Islands on the west coast of Ireland. So that was the first journey into renewables, and I never really went back. And so interestingly, Matt, what you were saying about there was no courses, I actually I did the first year of the first pilot scheme of the first renewable and sustainability masters in Cork in Ireland, again, many moons ago. So everything has really evolved since then. My, I suppose, career trajectory and how I ended up in this position now is like everyone else. It's just been constantly evolving, and people's jobs have been changing to keep up with legislation, the environment, what we're supposed to be doing, and what companies need. And as well, I suppose, anyone that's here in the call, like we're pushing companies and who we're working with, we're the ones bringing and saying, this is what we need to do and this is what we should be doing based on science. So I spent the last previous 10 years with Logitech, more based around developing their sustainability program around, it's more hardware. And now I've been with ServiceNow about 1.5 years. So it's really exciting to be in the tech world and, doing something just a little bit different, different problems, but ultimately all with the same goal. So yeah, I'm happy to be here today.
Thanks very much. And last but most definitely not least, we have Jason Lin, who we've heard from a little bit already in the video. But Jason, tell us a little bit more about yourself and maybe a little bit about your project.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. My name is Jason Lin, and I am a senior at Cranbrook, and I'm currently in Michigan. I've been living here my entire life, and I am an NFT alum. So last year in 2021, my team and our project won the 2021 EY Collaborate for Impact Challenge, which focuses on targeting SDG 17, Collaboration for the Goals. So a little bit about our winning project. It's called Movement, and it's basically an app that connects our users to eco-friendly locations, businesses, and also activist events in the area. And this project itself is really what got me into really passionate about environmental sustainability. So it's an idea that at first started in high school. I came up with it with some of my close friends just for a high school school competition. And I came up with it at first because I noticed that the people around me, everyone was aware of the environmental issues, but the majority of people had a hard time deciding how they can really help the environment. A lot of people really didn't know what to do, where they can find events, for example, cleanup events, where they can find eco-friendly restaurants. And this is where Movement comes in. So our goal is to help our users be able to find these eco-friendly events in their local area, to be able to find eco-friendly restaurants to eat at, eco-friendly stores to shop at, and so on. And after taking this prototype idea to NFTE, I really flushed the idea out. I really was able to develop it, and now it's currently a working app on the Apple App Store. And this whole experience really confirmed my passion for environmental sustainability. The positive support I've gained from my local community, from my peers, is really motivating me to keep on developing Movement, to keep on trying my best to help contribute to environmental sustainability. So today, I'm really honored to be here as a panelist, and I can't wait to learn from and discuss with other panelists.
Yeah, we're thrilled to have you here. Thanks very much. Well, as you can tell, we've got a great panel with a really broad range of experience and perspectives to have a great, interesting discussion. I'm going to just throw out a really general, broad question for you all to sort of frame the discussion in a way, which is sort of, what does it mean to be a sustainability leader in the field that kind of we're all in, but in your particular area? And maybe Candace, you want to start us off there?
Sure. I can talk a bit about Citi overall, which I'm representing. So as a global banking institution, Citi's mission, its core aim ultimately is enabling growth and economic progress, which it has done for over 200 years and across over 160 jurisdictions and countries. So wide breadth. But when you take a step back, Citi has been very reflective to think about what is its role as a corporate citizen. And so complementary to its business and global breadth, it has a really solid ESG agenda that reflects that sense of responsibility as a global bank, and endeavors to ultimately leverage Citi's business model to help solve some of society's toughest challenges and really help to, in doing so, drive that mission towards enabling progress. And there are a few ways that Citi as an organization, I think, stands out as a leader. Number one, Jane Fraser, our CEO, who joined in 2021, one of her first steps was to announce a city's commitments to achieving net zero GHG emissions by 2050. And that's centered around really working with cities' corporate clients and those that we finance to help them transition to net zero over that time, and also within cities' own operations by 2030. So really honing in on that goal that we all know is so key to helping the global transition. Additionally, on top of that, city has committed over $1 trillion in sustainable financing by 2030, and that's to help enable financing activities for environmental and social finance goals, things like green and social and sustainable bonds, sustainability linked loans, sustainable mergers and acquisitions, and so forth. So a lot of that activity is also happening in the background. And of course, there are other aims and innovative ways that city is seeking to achieve some of these goals, one of which is the City Impact Fund, which I'm a member of. And we are a $500 million fund, venture capital fund that's focused on investing in startups across 4 different themes, if you will. And one of those also includes climate resilience and sustainability. So, we ladder into also cities' broader efforts across ESG, both environmentally and socially. And I look forward to talking with you a little bit more about all of that.
All right, Matthew Bell, what about EY?
Maybe if you don't mind, Bill, I'm happy to not talk about EY and talk about sustainability leadership a bit more broadly.
Sure.
Sustainability professionals, I would say, are the only professionals, certainly within a corporate context, who think about the business beyond 5 years, right? And that might sound quite mean or harsh, but most functions within an organization tend to think reasonably short-term. Risk tends to look out within the first 12 months to 18 months to maybe 2 years, and strategy tends to be 3 to 5 years. And yet those of us who work, and everybody on this call certainly who work in the sustainability space or is passionate, Jason, like you are in it, we're thinking longer term, right? We're thinking multi-decadal changes. We're thinking about the environmental, social, and economic changes that are going to reshape the world around us, and in many cases reshape the businesses that we actually operate within. So what do I think sustainability leadership looks like? Well, I actually think it's individuals who hold a mirror up to organizations or to individuals and their actions that seem sensible in the short term, but in the long term don't make sense. So what is it from an organizational perspective that seems like a sensible 3 to 5 year strategy, but actually is just heading you down a pathway that's going to lead to the business not making money in the long term, not creating shareholder value, and not doing the right thing by the environment or communities. So really, I think sustainability professionals they're the canaries in the mine, but they're also the people who have their eyes on the horizon. So I think we're often thought of as the thorn in the side of many, because we are the people that remind organizations that have a singular focus on shareholder primacy and the fact that organizations should just be delivering short-term profit, to say, actually, we don't think that's your fiduciary duty, but also to make sure that we're trying to operate within planetary limits. I mean, the anchor of this talks around the UN SDGs. All of those essentially are trying to sit within the context of operating within societal and environmental planetary limits. So that's what I think leadership looks like, Bill.
That's interesting. Emer, what are some of your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it means, I suppose, for a corporation such as ServiceNow, it starts with making commitments and setting targets, and that show your ambition. For us, similar to Candace, that's 100% renewable electricity, setting science-based targets on the pathway to net zero. But of course, similar to what Matt was saying, it's like we need to think longer term and how are we embedding that into the business. And of course, that means resources. You can't set targets and have these commitments without a company deciding, right, well, this is the resources we're going to put to that. So that's what we're really just started in the last year or two. It's, we're building our team, we're investing in efficiencies, we're building up our programs across the different business units. We're investing in renewables. And then within our team as well, we're really trying to figuring out, again, this longer term vision of like, how do you embed it in and across, so it just becomes part of the company. And that's really where we're at that stage now. It's like, what are the techs and tools to operationalize sustainability? And so it's not just the sustainability team, like every job is a sustainability job, is kind of how we're trying to get things embedded in across the company. And we're still at a very early stage, but it's an exciting place to be.
Yeah, it really affects everything. Omar, what are some of your thoughts on it as well from the UN perspective?
Well, thank you, Bill. Actually, the UN perspective is quite multi-stakeholder, although it's of course it's an international organization primarily composed by member states. Of course, we have to take into consideration the political aspects of sustainability, but at least in the Department of Global Communications, we also deal with other constituencies, civil society organizations, and in our case, for example, academic institutions. So in our particular case, we have a primary responsibility because the SDGs were adopted right here, some meters below my office. And of course, we have a primary responsibility not only to remind people around the world, not only governments, but everybody, that every one of us has a responsibility towards the achievement of the SDGs. So we have to first tell them about the SDGs. Sadly, many people around the world is completely oblivious to the fact that these SDGs exist. Secondly, we need to provide guidance and expertise. In our particular case of the UN Academic Impact, we do that. We believe that sustainable leadership is through giving concrete and tangible examples of best practice and ideas. And I always emphasize this. We are not here just to give magical solutions, because the realities and the contextual realities and circumstances are quite different in every corner of the world. So there are no unique or magic solutions. We need to tailor solutions, and we need to include communities in the solutions. We need to include as many stakeholders as possible, and we believe in the potential of universities through their teaching, research, and community engagement, and their engagement with other stakeholders like the private sector or local governments to help us to advance the SDGs. And also we provide leadership by leading by example. So we prohibited single-use plastics here in the building. We are encouraging member states to do the same. We are saving on energy. We have a greener building, not only here in New York, but all around the world in different headquarters that we have at the offices. So that will be like the UN angle of it.
All right, thanks. That's really good. And so, Jason, I think you're next, and I want to say it's just great that you're on this panel and the things that NIFTY is doing here, because this problem really is really a problem that is a special problem, I think, for young people, and a special challenge for young people. And in so many cases, we've seen they've stepped up to the challenge and really shaped thinking around these issues with Greta Thunberg's work and others. So we're really interested to hear some of your ideas on what sustainability leadership means to you.
Right. So I think I'll kind of talk about the movement organization itself as a leader in sustainability. So our organization is relatively small, and we really aspire to be like the successful organizations that the panelists here are from. So that is our goal. So kind of adding on to what Mr. Bell said, for long-term goals, movement has a vision, and our vision is to help as many people as possible who want to help contribute to environmental sustainability be able to, because environmental sustainability is an issue that cannot just be solved by the biggest sustainable leaders. The majority of it is from everyone else. The majority of it is from everyone contributing together. And I think everyone who wants to contribute to environmental sustainability, whether it's a small thing, like shopping eco-friendly, we should make it really easy and accessible for them to do so. And that is Movement's vision. And we would like to achieve this through continuous improvement. So Movement is an app on the App Store, and we're constantly pushing out updates. So last month, we added a GPS tracking system onto our app, similar to what Google Maps or Yelp has. And we're using this GPS tracking system, we're able to sort out locations by their distance from our users and recommend eco-friendly locations and restaurants near these users so they can go to them easily. So this is just one of the ways we're utilizing, I guess, technology to continuously improve our app. And in the long term, we're also looking to continue to receive feedback from our users and continue to make the app better for them. And finally, I think how we're able to do this, how we're able to be a leader in sustainability in our community, a lot of it, I do want to give a thank you to my team. We have a small 15-member student team. They're all my friends in high school. We are all running this together. We all have our different tasks. And I think what's really motivating us to keep on improving the app is the fact that we know that we are helping people in our local community. That's what's really motivating us and keeping us going.
Well, I don't know if I can jump in here, but I mean, Jason, I love this this comment that it's everybody's responsibility and everybody who has an interest wanting to get involved. Emo's talking about this clearly from an organizational perspective around everybody having a role in sustainability. I was reminded as you were chatting though, Jason, of that possibly apocryphal tale of John F. Kennedy when he visited NASA and walked up to a janitor and said, "Hey, I'm Jack Kennedy. What are you doing?" And the janitor said, "I'm putting a man on the moon." Right. And I think, that ability for people to be able to see how their role, whatever that role is, translates to a significant long-term objective. And I think for us on this call, it's around, maintaining businesses within planetary limits. It's around, exploiting, natural resources in a way which is renewable and circular. I think that's really important. Sustainability really is everybody's business. It's a mantra that we've got in EY when we talk to our clients. This isn't something for just a renewable energy organization or for a new green startup. This is something that's everybody's responsibility.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. I would just add on to a really quick point. I think this is another reason why I think spreading awareness of the overall situation is a really important part of committing to this issue. And like Mr. Hernandez said, a big mission of his organization at UN is spreading awareness about this topic. And I think only by spreading awareness about it, we can get more people involved. And I think this is where a big potential in contributing to environmental issues is how to efficiently and effectively distribute information about these SDGs and about these goals, especially to younger students and the younger generation.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Candace, Jason's talked a little bit about how you can influence and work with individual decisions and individual actions. Matthew's working a lot from the consulting relationship with companies. You're investing in companies and deciding where to put money to help grow companies. How do you work sort of the climate and sustainability objectives into those decisions?
That's a really good question. So I'll take a step back and just talk a little bit about how we invest. So we are a returns-oriented investor, meaning we're looking for startup companies that in which we see an opportunity for outsized growth, whether that's because the market itself is growing rapidly or the company itself has a really amazing path to that growth at a rapid pace. And so what that means when we're looking at for a company that has that potential, but also is delivering on impact, we want to understand the founders drive their vision and how they anticipate the change being brought about through their company's operations. And we want to understand how well the founder is at being a champion for that. Ultimately, how committed they are to doing things like providing evidence and data that indicates that they are having the type of impact that they're setting forth. But when we're thinking about climate in particular, I think it can be oftentimes, or has been, quite a challenging industry or sector for the VC industry. I think you hear a lot from VCs around the sort of first wave of clean tech industries.
Capital, yeah.
Yeah, and And a lot of that challenge has to do with the fact that there's just so much in the way of, or was so much in the way of new technologies, hardtack coming to bear. I think what venture capital has learned is that there's really so much opportunity to be had in data-driven insights that actually help drive the behavioral change needed to increase uptake from consumers and households around clean energy options, reducing energy usage. For big corporations, they need that data to understand what's driving their emissions footprint in the first place, the sources of those emissions, how to pinpoint it. And so I think what we're seeing now is that underlying layer of enabling technological solutions and service providers that are bubbling up in the startup sector that will ultimately pave the way for easier uptake of hard tech, new technology, new consumer products and the like.
Right. That's fascinating. And Omar, obviously underpinning all of this is education, right? Education in the sense that Jason's going through, he's starting to complete his high school years and through a primary education, but also just educating ourselves beyond that point, because so much of this stuff is evolving so fast. How is the UN think about that, and what are some of the programs that you've done to promote that?
Well, in our case, Bill, I can speak on those programs that we take on with universities and colleges, and the idea is that not only this is for students or researchers on sustainable development proper, but the idea is that we are promoting this in such a way that the universities are mapping their courses and research projects to the SDGs. So they are mainstreaming sustainability towards the whole spectrum of schools, department, and faculty. We are teaching the universities how to review and assess the implementation of the 2030 agenda within their campuses, and how to connect with local and national as well as regional civil society organizations to have the SDGs embedded somehow in the projects that they are undertaking on campus and beyond. We are also helping universities to connect with the UN country teams in the field, but also with the governments to help them to reduce the gap between research and policy, because we believe it's very important that when governments, even at the local level, are designing and implementing policies regarding sustainability, they need data, they need facts, they need information. And universities are there to provide this information. But also, when it comes to education proper, imagine the potential of having a university with 10,000 students, their sisters, their brothers, the parents, the whole family. So the multiplier effect, the cascade effect of having a university student, regardless of its profession or academic course, to know and learn more about the SDGs is significantly impactful. And we are doing our best to connect these experiences from all around the world. Of course, the priorities in each country are different. Of course, sustainability is seen from a different angle depending on where you are, which are your circumstances. But overall, I think everybody understands the critical importance of the SDGs, particularly in the post-COVID-19 world, and particularly with the climate emergency that we're seeing. And also, let us remember that the main motivators of changes are throughout history has always been the youth. And most of the universities are composed precisely of these young students that has so great, so awesome, innovative and creative ideas that perhaps the older persons do not want to see, cannot see, but students are there to remind what's really important in today's world.
Interesting. And Emer, everyone else is in some ways trying to impact the world outside them in some ways, or the people they're working with. You're trying to work to change your own organization. How do you think about that from within?
Yeah, for us, that's, I suppose, how we thought it was going to be as well. But it's becoming a lot more important to be working with our supply chain. We've hit again, like in 21, we hit our target of 100% renewable electricity across our operations. And we thought, this is fantastic, this is great progress. And then at the same time, we were running and developing our full footprint across scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. And when that was complete and we achieved 100% renewable electricity, we then realized that we had 99% of our emissions were actually then in our value chain, and 91% were with our suppliers. So then it's that shift to understanding that actually, yes, you have to maintain what you're doing in your operations, but it's critical to be working with your supply chain and that piece of collaboration work. So we joined the CDP for the first time this year, the Carbon Disclosure Project for our supply chain. And this is our first year really in working with our supply chain. And again, it goes down to education. How do we interact with them? How can we bring them on board on our journey? And everyone is at a different stage of that sustainability journey as well. But for us, it's become a major priority is that responsible procurement, working with suppliers, and this collaboration piece as well around partnerships. It's key. None of us, we can't do this together, separately. We all have to figure out how we can support each other on all our separate journeys, whether it's net zero, climate finance, whatever is the issue that we're all trying to prioritize.
Yeah, that's interesting. And you mentioned net zero, which is, we've seen a huge number of organizations and institutions make these carbon neutrality pledges, these net zero pledges in the last year. We're really in the throes of the transition at this point. Things are really accelerating, but that also means it's really confusing sometimes to figure out what's working, what's not working. Broadly, I'd just like you guys to take a quick, 30 seconds or something to tell me what do you think's working? What do you think's not working? What's moving really quickly, and where are we stalled that we've got to find a way out of that situation? Maybe Omar, you can kick us off there.
Yeah, probably not only because I work with the UN, but also because I am from a developing country. Probably the most pressing question is financing and funding for the SDGs, because these transitions that we need to do to make the know-how, the technology that is required, the training that is needed, that all costs a lot of money. But developing countries, and actually this is one of the things being discussed precisely at COP27 as while we're speaking here, precisely is the finance behind this. So the global north has to come forward and say, hey, we are the ones that caused the problem in the first place. So here is the opportunities of financing to help developing countries to fund these different projects. So I believe funding is one of the key and most critical issues right now.
Can I
Candace,
be
you're involved in.
Can I be a real grump on this one?
Yeah, go ahead and jump in, and then Candace, I'm interested in your thoughts too.
We heard from COP27 that we've got 12,000 organizations now that have made a commitment to net zero. We're calling it out though as being green wishing, right? This sense that organizations are going to set for themselves a target some multi-decades into the future without having any meaningful targets or progress or actions to try and actually reduce their own greenhouse gas emissions, or that, as Emma says rightly, of their entire value chain, which is actually more fundamentally important. Now, clearly, there are organizations that are doing that. I mean, Candace talked about the fact that they're driving $1 trillion of investment, $1 trillion, by the way, that's a ludicrous number of zeros, but also, a significant part of their portfolio. But for a huge number of organizations, that's not the case. They're setting out these net zero targets, and yet greenhouse gas emissions, Bill, are going up every single year. We have to reduce emissions by half in the next 7 years if we've got any hope of keeping temperatures to within 2 degrees centigrade by the end of the century. And I think we often get ourselves caught up in this constant narrative of the latest activities, the latest reporting expectations, the latest initiative to sign up to. And we produced a report about a month ago as a firm, which was the least EY professional services report you'll read. It's called the Enough Review. And it basically says that the corporate sustainability movement, including ourselves, is failing, right? We're seeing a greater number of organizations signing up to the UN Global Compact, to other UN commitments, to net zero targets. And yet every single KPI indicators of progress against environmental action is heading in decline. Emissions are increasing, we're seeing sea temperatures rising, acidifications of the oceans, biodiversity loss at an unprecedented rate. We're seeing a massive decline in natural systems. And so we've got to try and ensure that organizations aren't just green wishing, right? They're not just hoping that their future stance is going to be able to get us there, but actually take some significant action. So my hope is that we're starting to see that. We're starting to see real commitments, and the rubber is, as they say, hitting the road. But I think we've got a long way to go. I think we've got to be really cautious that we aren't getting too excited by our own narrative at the expense of actually doing something.
Yeah, that's interesting. Emer, I want to hear about ServiceNow because you guys, again, are an organization really trying to avoid this greenwashing issue. But Candace, real quick, jump in and tell us, money is a huge part of this. And is the traditional financial system set up to move money this fast? Does it have the mechanisms, or do we need to see a lot of innovation and maybe entrepreneurship in that realm?
That's a really good question, and I won't try to speak for the industry as a whole, but I will say this, that we've seen over the last 10 years an enormous amount of focus and energy among investors across asset classes around these very issues, driving requests for disclosures and trying to align around KPIs that are meaningful to multiple stakeholders so that there can be some level of transparency. And so I think to the extent that the investor community has been proving itself efficient, it has been driving towards greater transparency from companies and accountability towards some of these goals. I think we have a long way to go, but we have seen an influx of money moving towards ESG labeled or identified investments, which, we hope that means it's going to companies that lean towards more responsible approaches. And we have also seen an increase incrementally, or actually significantly, in impact investing as a category specifically, which separately from ESG impact investing, I think focuses heavily on what are game-changing solutions, what are, what will be next, tomorrow's next big problem-solving effort, and who are going to be the entrepreneurs that really bring forth some opportunities to fix it. So in that, we've seen there was almost a 40% jump in impact investing, in the impact investing space from a dollar perspective between, I think, 2019 and 2020. So now we'll have to see how those numbers shake out, post-pandemic. But I do think, I believe that we're seeing a continued trend among corporates moving balance sheet capital and other modes of financing into impact investing. And among the big companies, once a category leader goes for it, we tend to see a lot of other industry players follow. So I think that trend around corporate innovation and dedication to impact investing will also help to drive more uptake in the years to come.
Right. And Emer, how do you avoid this greenwashing issue? Because it really is, it's easy to hold a bunch of meetings and set a goal and go about your business as usual, but we hear a lot of people talk about it really can't be business as usual anymore. You've got to really fundamentally change and push things along in ways that can be sometimes pretty uncomfortable, right?
Yeah, again, I think, for us, looking more operationally at what we can do, we're really focused on like our data center teams and like working with our colo providers. I mean, that is our biggest operational footprint. And one of the biggest parts there is making sure that like the product that we're using within the colos is that is 100% renewable electricity. And, there's the colo providers that we're using, like everyone is at a different stage in their sustainability journey. And depending on where it's located as well, everyone has a different access to renewable electricity. And there's such a variance of how we can access renewable electricity across the globe as well. That's one of the things that we're really trying to collaborate on. We joined RE100 this year, which is, an amazing group, which is run by the Climate Group, and they, bring groups together. And so corporations can kind of put I suppose more of an emphasis with the government on, the government needs to be hitting, I suppose, certain amounts of renewable electricity as well. What corporations want is access to renewables. We want access to, renewables that aren't, really expensive. And so that is, if one country can do it, other countries should be able to provide the same. And I suppose it's like everyone else that's at a different stage in their journey. In some places, we can spend, $2, of a unit of renewables. In another place, we're spending 50. So, it's really about leaning in those areas and to support? What can we do at a government level? What can we do to influence collaboratively with other corporations similar to ourselves?
And what, tell me a little bit, and Jason, I think maybe you can pick up on some of this too, but what kind of possibilities do sort of technology and digitalization and that sort of thing offer us here, Ema?
Well, obviously we're a workflow company. So, and we're starting to provide like ESG products, and one of our ESG products we now have, part of that is that you can calculate your carbon footprint, and it's about, again, it goes back to operationalizing all these things. The amount, in my previous company and up till now, the constant evolving of targets and this, what Matt was alluding to around the greenwashing. There's, you sign up to this, you sign up to this, you sign up to this, and so there's all these reports that you're constantly reporting, and you don't have any time to actually do anything. So really it's about embedding, and that's what we're spending our time doing now. What are the techs and tools that we can bring on board so that it's, it's not, again, the sustainability team doing the reporting and doing the decarbonization. It's, it's embedding it across the company so that teams like ourselves have time to spend working with the data center teams on efficiencies, and working with our offices, and working on the actual programs that we can spend on reducing our footprint instead of just reporting on it, which is the dream.
Okay, and Jason, you obviously must have some thoughts on digitalization and the potential for technology, but also give us your sense of how satisfied you feel with the progress that's being made and where things are headed.
Yeah, so I think the progress being made is, yes, technology is a great potential for the future. Like the app I'm working on, a lot of mobile tools, a lot of these developments are good for not only spreading awareness, but also a lot of new innovations. And I think the direction we are moving towards, I know Omar talked a little bit about this. Specifically, funding is a big issue for a lot of these sustainability issues. And I think just from my own perspective, a possible solution or a possible area that we could possibly dive into for these countries, these organizations, to take action easier, because a big issue is funding. So I think there are a lot of cheaper solutions out there that can start or begin to tackle, for example, greenhouse gas emissions. So for example, a concept called eco-driving, it's like a specific way to drive without accelerating too quickly, decelerating too quickly, without carrying excess weight on your cars. And this way, it's like a pretty affordable way to implement in a lot of countries. In the US too, I know it's heavily utilized in countries like Sweden and Canada. And it's just a good way for us to just take action and go into it. It doesn't require a lot of funding. It's a good way to require greenhouse gases. And I think the overall spreading of awareness of more of these type of solutions is a good way for us to tackle while we're gathering funding for these more expensive technological solutions.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, thanks very much, everybody. Those are some really interesting thoughts. I think we're going to do some Q&A now. And I think JD is going to join us again, I believe. And maybe he's looked through the questions. I've been so engaged in the discussion, I haven't had a chance to pick out some of the
I don't know, Bill, if I can quickly.
Oh yeah, Omar. Yeah. Okay. I thought you had to duck out, but you're back.
Because I'm leaving, but
please do.
Very quickly, I noticed to be have been a pleasure to be here with all the panelists and to hear all the thoughts about this last topic. I believe it's important to acknowledge that simply technology is a driver for change, it's a driver for sustainability, but also we have to keep in mind that there's a serious gap between the developing world and the developed world when it comes to use of technology and access to technology, but also there's digital literacy. So there are certain things, as Jason pointed out, we have these wonderful apps and technological-based solutions and IT solutions, but we have to acknowledge the fact that in many parts of the world where there's no even a constant fluid of electricity or internet connection. So of course we have to really think how do we reach those areas of the world that do not have these opportunities that exist in the global north. And I will stop there. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Omar. JD, you're back. Do you have
All
a sense
right.
of the questions?
Yeah, sure. I can pose some of the questions here and maybe open it up to anybody who might like to answer them. Let me start with this one. So, what can older generations learn from Gen Z about climate change initiatives? What messages are the large corporations missing? I feel like maybe, Jason, that should go to you first for an answer.
Yeah, I think a big part of it is for like these big corporations, or for me as a high school student. I think a hard part is getting a lot of the people around me to get excited about innovating for these solutions, to be knowledgeable, to be aware of these solutions. I think this is a big part of it. And I think one potential, area we can focus on is really in school communities when there's peers influencing each other in a learning community. This is where we can really spread information about SDGs and really get that in there. So for me personally, just growing up, going to Michigan schools, there's never been any classes, any required classes, in fact, any classes on SDG goals, on environmental issues. But we do have required classes like health class, religion class. And I think it will not be that hard to implement like a required class to really get all of us, young people excited about the idea of innovating, to be aware of it, and to get out there to take action. So I think the school community is a really good place for us, to motivate us. And I think motivation is like a big key that organizations and corporations should, try to focus on and get more people involved.
Thank you. Let me turn it the same question to any of the representatives from large companies, or Bill, if you'd like to weigh in on this question of what you've learned maybe from Gen Z as you have seen Gen Z's engagement and activism on climate issues.
I'm happy to start with that one, JD. I mean, you touched at the end on activism. I would say actually the activism that's been driven by, for want of a better term, youth, has been one of the most influential on climate action at the corporate level, particularly within the banking sector. So, where we have seen activity in relation to investor communities, where younger people who have started to work through their pension funds or taking active investments, and driving activity to ensure that organizations who are asset owners, people who are the major shareholders of organizations or have a large number of shares, actually engage with those organizations on their activities to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions or to transform their energy portfolio in the case of many heavy emitters in the fossil fuel sector, has been pretty profound and has actually led to a lot of the activity that we're seeing in the banks and in the asset managers today. But the other part of activism that's been really interesting has been class actions that we've seen being taken by young communities against governments. So we've seen a couple of these now that have played out. One in Australia last year, where a coalition of youth came together to take action against the environment minister for making approvals to expand a thermal coal mine that they said was inconsistent with creating an environment that was just for them in their future existence. They won that case against the environment minister, and they overturned the environment minister's ruling. We've seen the same in other countries in Europe, where again we've seen youth coalitions take the government to task around some of their policies, which were inconsistent with a net zero target that they've established for themselves, and decarbonisation. The same in New Zealand as well. So that we've got a lot to thank the youth of today for in the context of progress on climate action. Here's the problem, and here's the challenge. It's for them to deal with the worst consequences of. So I will be dead and buried by the point at which the most severe impacts of climate change will be ravaging the world if we don't make serious action. And so unfortunately, a lot of this burden sits on the shoulders of younger people now, millennials, Gen Z, who will have to live in a very changed world. And so we'll have to be much more entrepreneurial and drive innovation, technology shifts, and transformation of business models to make sure that we are really addressing the challenges that we have been responsible for in our generation.
And I would say,
please.
Yeah, I was just going to say, not just definitely entrepreneurial, definitely innovative, but also assertive. And I'd love to hear from Candace and Emer about their organizations. I'm assuming, like mine, like Matthew's, young people are having an outsized impact within corporate teams, right? And having an impact that they might not have had in a previous generation because they care about this, they want to be involved, and they're frankly pushing older people in their organization to do things, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like we see it's such an important part of us trying to get talent and get, people into our company as well. We don't want to be seen as a company that's not doing anything. Like we want Gen Z, we want talent to come into the company and be proud of the company that they're working for. And that is part of the driver as well as what really kind of, I suppose, pushed the agenda within the company as well, is that like more and more when people were coming and through the onboarding process, these are the questions that are being asked. This is what's being asked when people are being interviewed in the company. And even throughout the year, there's people maybe coming into another part of the company that's nothing to do with sustainability, but they want to speak to the sustainability team to make sure. And those are such the important things that are making the change. So they're, being interviewed by leadership. Leadership isn't involved with sustainability. Then all of a sudden they're going, oh, this guy wants to talk to the sustainability people. And they're going, who's the sustainability person? So it's all that pressure from Gen Z and youth is just so important for pushing all corporations to do the right thing.
Yeah, these are really great points. And, as I mentioned, starting in advertising, tracking consumer trends, there has been, from what I've seen, a long-standing generational evolution that's been underway. But what I will say about the transition of corporate culture, I think it is coming from both levels. You have new generations coming into the workforce with a different set of priorities and expectations, rightfully so, of corporate action. But you also have some visionary leaders. And it really has taken, I think, both levels of that organization to drive a lot of this movement forward when it comes to transitioning corporate behavior. So I would just recommend to any young people joining an organization, for instance, if they're in a team that isn't a sustainability organization or oriented, just as Emer mentioned, to look out for who the sustainability visionaries are within the organization. And they tend to be at the higher level. I'd say, keep networking, tie the loop back to the larger organizational business priority, and you will make sure that your voice is heard on those issues.
Thank you so much. Some great comments coming up in the chat and some good questions too. Really appreciate it. We just have time for one more question. So let me pose this again to anyone on the panel who'd like a word. So problem solvers such as inventors and scientists and entrepreneurs, of course, have identified many viable ideas to address climate change around the world. But how can we systematically scale solutions that can be implemented in other countries and communities? This is a great question for a community of entrepreneurs here, because of course, so many here have fantastic concepts or are in the startup phase, but of course, scaling it is also ultimately important. So what are your thoughts about scalability and how to promote that in the best ways? Please, anybody who'd like to start.
I'm happy to start there. Again, I feel like I'm always starting, so apologies. Do shout me down if you don't want me to. So it's a really good challenge, this one, JD, and a great question for us. So well done. One of the things I would say is we have all of the technologies available to us today in order to fundamentally address climate risk from a mitigation perspective. Right? That doesn't sound like a particularly sensible thing to say, because otherwise, why would we not have addressed climate change already? The truth is, we've got real inertia in the system. And some of that's understandable, and some of it is very unfair, right? So, for example, we need to rapidly decarbonize our energy systems. Energy makes up around 1/3 of our global greenhouse gas emissions. And in developing, or developed countries, I should say, like the United States and the UK, where lots of you and I am, we've got really old energy infrastructure, coal in energy infrastructure that's fully depreciated. So it's a case of how do we quickly close down those coal-fired power stations and transition to hopefully renewable energies that'll significantly decarbonize the energy grid. But in developing nations, so Southeast Asia, for example, the average coal-fired power station is just 12 years old. So in poorer nations, we've got much younger infrastructure that needs to be transitioned at significant cost. So how do we overcome those challenges? So again, it doesn't become a technology challenge necessarily. It actually becomes a policy and a financing challenge. And hence why we've started to hear in the COP over the last couple of weeks, the need for us to ensure that the $100 billion a year that's been agreed to developing nations is actually getting there. So far, by the way, the maximum has been, I think Bill will correct me, but $86 billion has been the maximum we've actually provided. Supposed to be delivering at least 100 billion per year. So there's some real challenges in that. But to the comment on scalability, I actually think this is an area where, because of the technology-enabled world and the networking skill that we now have with individuals in the entrepreneurial network, and increasing number of people like Candice who are looking to put their capital into projects that they know are going to be fundamentally important over the next few decades, we've actually got a really interesting catalyst here for how we can drive and scale innovation in a way we've never seen before. I think great ideas can be scaled very quickly in this space. And in some ways, in the developing nations that we've touched on, I can see one of our participants here is talking about need for action in Ghana. How is it that we can go from ancient technologies in many developing nations, leapfrog some of the technologies that we have put in place in developed nations in the last decade or so, to actually move straight forward to the new technologies of the future? And I think entrepreneurs, scalability through technology connectivity and access to the sort of finance that Candice has talked about, whether that's impact finance or venture capital or even just project finance or debt, all of those I think are enablement features that are going to be really important for us.
Thank you. Would anyone else like a word on this question? Well, Bill, Jason, go ahead, please.
Yeah, so I think Matt talked a lot about like kind of bigger scaling for really innovative startups. So I guess I'll kind of just talk just very briefly about kind of more local for younger entrepreneurs who have just gotten their idea, how they can start scaling their idea a little bit, because this is something that I really struggled with when I first had this idea. I really struggled to promote it. And I think a good place to start is to go to your very local community. Yes, at first you may have an idea that you really want to impact the entire nation's entire world, but I think starting small in the community around you is the best approach. So go to them for feedback on your idea, what can be improved. At first, I thought my app was I thought it was perfect at first. I thought it was a really good idea, but after, going into a nearby town and really asking a lot of the college students there, the people there walking around, how they felt about it, I really found out a lot of areas that I really need to improve on. And I think beyond local communities, I think kind of to bring it back to NFT, it's a great network that can be really fully utilized by young entrepreneurs, young innovators. I think the experience itself really, from the judging, they gave me a lot of good advice, to the grant money, which is put to really good use on further expanding the reach of my app. I think just utilizing these resources offered to us young entrepreneurs is really crucial too. And that's a really good way to start scaling up.
Thank you so much for that. And thank you, Jason, for being such an example to our global community of what young entrepreneurs can do to address these conversations. Bill, let me turn it to you for some quick closing words before we move on to our final segment.
Sure. Yeah, that was a really amazing discussion in some way. I really impressed with not only the entrepreneurship idea and the innovation, but also this idea of asserting oneself and really pushing things along, getting out of this greenwishing. I really love that formulation, the greenwishing as opposed to greenwashing, which is often thrown about as a sort of derogatory term. But greenwashing really captures a lot of it, because it's about people who really genuinely want to have something happen, but often we're not asserting ourselves and getting out of that business as usual mindset and really pushing ahead with real action that we've talked about with Emer and Candice and Jason. So I think those are my big takeaways from this really interesting discussion. Thanks to everybody.
Well, thank you. Thank you to our audience for your thoughtful questions. Thank you, panelists, for that incredibly engaging exchange. And of course, special thanks to you, Bill, for guiding it so skillfully. Please join me in a virtual round of applause. You know, by and large, the young people who decide to tackle a World Series of Innovation Challenge are driven not just by a desire to improve life and work in their local communities, but also by a deep need to affect social change. So before we close, let's hear briefly from a few NIFTY alumni about their own feelings on climate action and what's driving them.
So talking about the United Nations and what that means and being able to preserve the world and climate change, what gets me motivated is realizing that the world is not forever. And so we have to do what it takes in order to preserve the world while we have it.
We have created so much waste that it has an impact on our natural disasters. Natural disasters just alone in the United States create an impact of $300 billion. We live in the 21st century and we still haven't found a solution for this. We are surrounded by the smartest, most ingenious people in the world and still suffer from consumerism and waste.
The pollution, litter, and way of thinking of many members of our community hasn't switched into thinking about the huge issue that is climate change.
It's time to get real. Stop passing the buck. And let's come together to save us, our generations, and the mother of all, our planet.
The opportunity to frankly rebuild a sustainable society from the ground up fills me with purpose.
Most of the people who work in sustainability are either channeling their frustration into action or channeling their love for nature into action, or both.
I think what really gives me hope are programs like NIFTY that give young entrepreneurs the opportunity to grow their business and help the current issue in our environment.
I was just here at an innovation day in Miami, Florida, working with students, and we were coming up with ways to tackle challenges around us about the environment, and to see the amazing care that the students gave the challenge, right? Being able to sit down with them and know that they are actively thinking about these problems just as we as adults are, gives me hope that we are going to eventually be on the right track to preserving the earth, the climate, and tackling these goals.
It makes me really excited to see how it is possible for youth to take the reins on the climate issue and make solutions, regardless if the government is supporting them or if the higher-ups are supporting them.
We live in a generation in where our young people are not afraid to speak up, to say their 2 cents. I believe that we're living in a generation and we're being educated not only in school, but through social media. And we're a platform where you can create a impact worldwide.
People speaking out on social media platforms or in their own community about the huge issue that is climate change. We need people to speak up and really speak their truth and their mind so that climate change can be heard and more people can grow their knowledge on what climate change is in order to take a stand.
Gen Z is serious about environmental issues, and that fills my heart with hope. We have to inspire more people and lead by example.
Especially young people everywhere, making climate change the focus of their purpose, mission, and work, whether in business, politics, activism, or technology, proves a critical shift in philosophy, from climate change being an inconvenient truth to the key to our collective future.
Well, everybody, as you can see, there is no shortage of NIFTY alumni and students who want to continue to be in the vanguard of addressing these important issues for our world. Thank you, alumni. We will all benefit from your passion, and we're grateful that you took the time to share your ideas with us. At this time, I would just like to offer one more thanks to all 10 of our Innovation Challenge supporters for making the World Series of Innovation such a fantastic opportunity for so many young entrepreneurs. And of course, once again, to the Citi Foundation and EY, along with ServiceNow, for making this excellent conversation possible today. Finally, to all of you in the virtual audience, thank you for joining us and the thousands of NIFTY educators around the world as we fuel a future where these empowered young entrepreneurs tackle and solve our world's most pressing problems. We look forward to welcoming you next November at the UN Delegates Dining Room for another fascinating Global Goals conversation.